So I'm Ciarán Fitzgerald. I'm the current head gardener at Johnstown Castle. I've been here with just over a year now. So it's been exciting kind of last year. I've hit a lot of my targets, but kind of from here on has been all my big projects will start. So we're starting our rewilding program now in Johnstown, and that's kind of my main focus over next year, that and rejuvenating our native woodland. So along with the restoration of the wall garden and sunken garden.
As you're the head gardener, you get to choose how the gardens will change into the future. Can you tell us what the gardens used to look like through the eras?
Yeah, it's gone through quite a dramatic change over the years. It was originally just parkland, where the vast majority of the 100 acres that we have today was actually just pure native woodland. So then during the 1840s, when Daniel Robertson redesigned the grounds, that's when the Arboretum was created, and there was a wall garden, but that has since been moved to the current location, and that was added on to then in the 1850s. So it's gone through quite a lot of changes. It's very much a man-made kind of manicured landscape at the moment, which is what you can kind of see, which I'm kind of trying to work against and trying to bring it back to almost the original design before Daniel Robson, and bringing back a lot more of that native woodland.
So we know that the area has changed throughout the eras. Can you show us what it looks like on the map?
Yeah, so we thankfully have quite an early dated map here in Johnstown, which we're using an awful lot as reference for kind of the original construction during the Daniel Robson era, like 1847, which gives us a good idea of what was there before. So this is the estate map that we use as a reference point for an awful lot of the original designs from Daniel Robinson. So earlier I was talking about the original wall garden, which is here, and it has since been moved here, so it's completely deconstructed and rebuilt here. And then the second half of the wall garden is built about 10 years later, just behind it here. Some of the original terrace walling here was just recently discovered at the beginning of this year, and we hope to restore that over the kind of next 2 to 3 years. What's not shown in this map is actually our lower lake, which was built during the famine as a famine relief project, and it took 400 men with shovels to dig it out. So that is actually the largest freshwater lake in Wexford, and it comes in at just under 14 acres.
As of right now, who owns the land?
So it was handed over to the state in 1945, and that was owned then by the predecessor of Chagas, who currently own the land, but the Irish Heritage Trust have a lease on it for the next, I think it's about 10 years.
What has the state done in the past specifically to help the area?
I suppose, well, one of the obvious ones is the room that we're standing in here now at the moment, which is the Irish Agricultural Museum, which has probably been the greatest impact on the site. So it's like a 2-story, quite a sizable enough museum, and to this day we're still like restoring bits and bobs to throw in here. So that's been probably their greatest kind of impact on Johnstown.
Is there any of the old equipment in the area that used to be used in the past? Is it still being used today as was intended?
Up until a few months ago, I did have one of the old international tractors in use around the grounds, but then they thankfully upgraded me to a modern, much more suitable tractor. We have there's an awful lot of the original features that are still here. They're not in functioning use, such as like the Pierce's engineering kind of heating system for the glasshouse. It's still in situ, but it's not usable, unfortunately. And there's a couple of the other any of the machinery that was used, it tends to be in the museum as a showpiece, more so used around the grounds.
Do you think Johnstown Castle is better off now than it was in the past, say 50 or 100 years?
It's a hard one to answer. I would say in the last 50 years, I think it's in a much better position. We're much more solid kind of in our plan going forward, and financially we seem to be there's enough there to develop the grounds and maintain it, which is quite nice. 100 years ago, that's when it was in private hands, so they had the freedom of, they could do whatever they want. So it's you lose that a little bit once you're owned by a body, but we still we still have a bit of freedom within reason, which is kind of nice for our developing the grounds.
So we know much of the landscape was crafted by men. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, pretty much every visible bit of landscape that you can see from the castle or even within the grounds of the estate itself was all man-made, be it the rolling hills by the Daniel Robertson design or the lakes that were dug out during the famine to basically even the woodlands themselves, like they're all hand-planted, and in the Arboretum, which is about 5 acres, they're all non-native, highly selected kind of specialised trees, so every bit of it is a man-made landscape in the true sense.
What are the ramifications on the landscape from all this work?
I suppose with any man-made landscape, it's never fully thought through, so you always have some bit of an impact in the long term. And here, it's the water table was very highly disturbed, so the vast majority of the land here is actually quite water sodden. So our garden lake, which is our upper lake, is much higher than the wall garden itself. So that creates any just basically a knock-on effect of the front half of the wall garden or any surrounding woodland around it. It's quite boggy, so it's not ideal. But I kind of like in the future I'll just plant to suit the ground. But yeah, it's challenging.
Do you think the land would be better off without such extensive human intervention?
Unfortunately, we've kind of gotten to the point where we've altered the land so much that human intervention is an unfortunate kind of necessity in bringing the land back to kind of a stable kind of working ecosystem. So I use the phrase that Mary Reynolds used a lot, where we need to be guardians, not gardeners. So in gardens, it's our own interpretation of nature. So rather than kind of creating these very false sort of idealized versions of nature, we should just work with what we have and what's around, and that's why I'm planting mainly natives around here and kind of working with nature rather than against it.
Speaking of the landscape, how much of the plant life around here was imported and where did it come from?
There's very little of the kind of herbaceous plants, let's say in the wall garden, that was originally imported, still alive. There's basically just a couple of pear trees, and that's about it. The vast majority of the trees, though, like our arboretum's fairly well stocked with trees from all around the world. We have champion Monterey cypress, and we have some quite considerably large, like redwoods and stuff like that. So our tree collection does span the globe quite literally.
Are there any downsides to the variety of plant life you have?
There's no knock-on effect specifically from the variety that we have here, but I find that the horticulture sector, they do need to have a tighter grasp in like plant importation and that, because an awful lot of the diseases that we have, let's say the ash dieback or now the chestnut one, it is from importing plants. So there is a knock-on effect from bringing in exotics, but thankfully it hasn't hit us yet.
And now I'll ask about the wildlife. Is it all local? Did the animals show up naturally, or again, were they brought in?
Any of our native wildlife is just naturally just kind of wanders in and out. We've tried to have as little barriers as possible for wildlife so they can access the grounds. The only kind of imported kind of ones would be the peacocks, and there was a couple of ducks as well. But apart from that, it's just just naturally wander in. We've actually got a couple of motion sensor cameras around, and we've registered every native land mammal on the grounds over the past number of years, which is kind of exciting.
It may seem like the questions I have might be a bit negative, but of course humans can have a good effect on the world. I know you're doing a lot to keep the area in good nick and keeping the place healthy. What do you think the best part of your job is for the land?
It's going to sound really cheesy, but it's showing people different ways of gardening. Like, my main focus is showing people that you don't have to have like really expensive fancy exotics that could invade kind of spread beyond the garden, and just use natives, and kind of showing people different ways of kind of using plants. Like I'm going to introducing an edible woodland in here where everything is a 7-tier system of just perennial fruit and veg, so it's a lot less labor intensive on the land, and it's just showing people different ways of gardening. It doesn't have to be, I always tell people, like if you're finding gardening hard, you're doing it wrong, and it's kind of just changing that mindset.
Going back to the influence of man and how the landscape is man-made and all planned out, I wanted to speak about the building itself. It was made during the Gothic revival period, so of course it's made to look older than it actually is. I think it ties all of the human touches together. What do you think?
Very much so. It very much goes in keeping with the landscape around it, which is in itself like it's curated to look like something that it's not meant to be. So it does tie in quite well.
Do you like the castle itself, or are you more of a fan of the nature around it?
I would be very much the nature around it. I find the castle appealing, but I come from Lismore, Waterford, which has a castle that is much, much larger than this. So I've always been spoilt as a child with castles, so it never really doesn't have the wow factor for me anymore, but the grounds themselves really do.
It's clear they were going for a certain style and feel for both the castle and the land surrounding it. Do you think it all mixes together well yourself?
I do. I think because the whole landscape around it itself is so obviously manicured and man-made that what would you call it, the kind of faux Gothic kind of style of the castle, it blends in. It doesn't seem as out of place. It all looks man-made, which is kind of almost quite appealing about it.
Maybe I'm being a bit spiritual or overthinking, but I'd like to talk about the values you and the state hold, being monetary value and moral value. When you were showing us around the first day we visited, you mentioned a company was trying to buy some of the old trees around, so let's mention that.
Yeah, so before the policy in the land used to be to sell off any tree that fell, and I kind of put a stop to that once I started. So as of now, any native or any broadleaf tree that falls, be it from wind damage or just us knocked it due to unsafety, it actually is just let rot back into the ground for biodiversity. It's put a few heads kind of puzzling because I just can't understand why you're not selling off firewood or that, but for me it's for the greater good. That's why I kind of leaving it there. Yeah, I suppose like a couple of the trees, like the yew and stuff like that, we were requested by some wood turners and that to use it for projects for them, but I just felt the benefits for on the grounds here, it just outweighs kind of the commercial value of the tree. So at the moment, like any small branches where I wood chip, I'm now growing edible mushrooms in it, and that. So like I think the commercial value of the wood just doesn't outweigh the kind of the benefit to nature and kind of even for us here on the grounds itself.
Do you think the land has always been valued so highly by the previous owners through history and by the state?
I'll democratically answer this. Through history, very much so. Back in the height of the estate, when it was around 35,000 acres, we have on record that they planted over 600,000 trees for no other monetary value other than they just wanted woodland, which is quite outstanding really for the time where, like that would have been during the famine, where every bit of land would have been grabbed for growing crops and that. So it kind of showed that they really did care, and that's kind of rolled on through the history with a lot of the stories from the family. It kind of changed a bit when I handed over to the state, and it hasn't quite been kept to the same standard. But I hope to reverse that from here on.
Has anyone ever sold off the plant life or the wildlife to others here?
Not the native wildlife. The Chagas used to sell off the peacocks in the past. We don't at the moment, just because of the amount of care that it actually takes to maintain a bird like that. We don't, and any native wildlife, no. And in terms of plants, not really. No, I'm giving away a lot of them for free at the moment. And again, it's just more so. I think the community they can build within the gardening kind of community around the area by just giving away plants rather than charging people for every little bit. I think it builds a better relationship with the locals than if you were to charge for every little bit and bob kind of going.
I know there are some areas being preserved for wildlife reasons. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, so at the moment we've cut our grass cutting schedule down from 22 acres to 8 acres, and that's to create hay meadows around, because an awful lot of people plant for pollinators, which is just the adult form of the insect. Let's say if you take butterflies for example, they always plant budlies and stuff like that, and that's great. That's how you give flowers to the adult, but there's nothing for the larva stage, so it's kind of like feeding a steak dinner to a baby. It's not going to survive, it just doesn't kind of compute. So we're trying to build kind of like the whole cycle for the wildlife around here, a home and kind of sanctuary for every part of it.
A more personal question, but how about in the world in general? Do you think nature is valued as it should be, in your opinion?
No. No, not really. It's unfortunate. There is very much a shift, especially in the kind of younger generations, where they are very much more conscious of our impact in the environment, but the people who are making the decisions, they either don't get it or they're just not moving quick enough. There's just not the incentive, it doesn't seem at the moment, which is, yeah, it's disheartening, but I suppose like the silver lining to that is, like, for me, is at least I was given the platform here to try and make a change in 100 acres, which is a large spot, but on a whole it's not great, but I'm hopeful. I'm usually like the realist and kind of slightly edging on pessimist, but I've some bit of hope that it will kick in where when people, those in power, start losing money, that they realise, oh wait, I kind of have to do something, and I think we're waiting on that, but hopefully it'll be sooner rather than later.
What are Johnstown Castle's plans for the future? What will be restored or upgraded?
It varies on the location of the grounds. The gardens itself, that's very much kind of, I've like a 5-year, 10-year and 20-year plan, and that'll just be varied stages of mainly just plants. There'll be 1 or 2 little restoration works of, let's say, the original Daniel Robertson kind of terrace walk walls. The castle will be the main focus for the trust over the next few years. We aim to have most of the rooms on the first and ground floor kind of fully restored, just like this one here.
You've been working very hard in the gardens, so how are they expected to change into the future?
Slowly, kind of over the next sort of 10 to 20 years is as far as I've envisioned my kind of impact on the grounds, if they'll keep me here that long. Over the next sort of like 2 years, my main focus will be the wall garden, where we're replacing 90% of the current herbaceous plants in there with kind of a prairie style, so there'll be a lot more naturalistic, and everything inside it has a purpose, be it for birds, leaf insects or pollinators. Nothing will be in there for prettiness sake, kind of. And then outside the wall garden, I've already talked about the hay meadows that we're after creating, but I'll also be replanting the native woodlands here. So we aim to plant in around 5,000 native trees over the next 5 years and work on that in the coming years. Everything outside the wall garden as of now will only be native plants.
Let's talk about the glass houses. Right now they're in disrepair, but I know there are plans to fix them up. Could you walk me through those plans?
Yeah, there's no problem at all. Thankfully, we got a sizable enough grant last year for the restoration of the glass house. We're unsure right now if it'll be enough to fully restore the glass house, but we're going to do as much as possible. Once they're kind of complete or semi-complete, the main aim will be to get kind of a production area for plants up and running, as well as a palm house. The propagation area, the main focus for the next 2 years will be the garden itself here, and then after that we're going to start selling plants to the public.
I heard you wanted to set up a little area to do yoga. I think the idea is great. I'm not exactly a yoga person, but I really like the idea of it. Where would you like to set this up, and could you talk about it a bit more?
Yeah, the idea for the yoga kind of room here, it came about because one of our staff also does forest bathing, and I thought what would be the best way to do forest bathing, but actually inside within the forest itself, like within a tree. So we have quite a large conifer here in the grounds that has drooping branches, and it forms an almost just a natural kind of dome, you could say, inside it with the branches. So I'm going to prune that and clear it out and just put down mulch on the ground for just a more natural sort of yoga studio, literally within a tree.
Finally, do you think the future of Johnstown Castle is looking bright?
I do. The Trust have put an awful lot of effort and money in setting up the current kind of projects around the grounds, including the new visitor centre, and they're very hungry at seeking out new grant money. Because we're a charity, they're constantly on the lookout for either donations or grants, and they're very active in doing that, which is very kind of it's very positive kind of on the staff that's here, because it just shows that they really want to invest in the grounds and kind of develop it over the years. So I think it will be a bright future for Johnstown Castle.